Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tri Radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jensen, joined again by my co-host, Leo Dodds. And this is part two of our two-part series on CAPA steps. If you remember our inaugural episode, we went over CAPA history and overview. And then last time we went into some details about the problem statement, investigations, and then how to conduct a root cause. So now this episode, Leo's going to help wrap up part two, and we'll go from there. Hey, Leo.
Hey there. I was trying to think about, the best way of kind of launching into CAPA, and just as you said a minute ago, CAPA, the whole CAPA life cycle really starts back at identifying the problem, defining that problem statement, undertaking your investigation, doing your root cause analysis, then you get to your CAPA, and finally to the effectiveness check, right? So all of those things you need to do in order to get a pretty decent CAPA on the other end. And so today we're going to focus on the CAPA piece itself and the effectiveness check. So yeah, as I was thinking about it, it's almost like planning your wedding, right? So when you get to the wedding day, you say, yeah, I'm getting married. Well, a lot of work went into it before you got to the wedding day, right? There was all the, invitations and all that business that went into everything ahead of time. And that's exactly what it's like with this whole CAPA life cycle. You've got to do all that heavy lifting so that when you get to the CAPA piece, it's actually pretty straightforward. And if you recall from our last episode, what we did was we identified the root cause of the problem. And we can't do a CAPA unless we know the root cause that we're trying to eliminate. So that's a really important precursor to starting the CAPA plan. So if you remember, we identified the root cause, and a good root cause analysis should specifically declare and identify what the root cause or root causes are at the end of that step. So we should be coming into the CAPA portion now armed with the root cause or root causes. And the purpose of the CAPA plan, so Corrective Action, Preventive Action plan, is to eliminate the root cause or root causes that I identified in that root cause analysis or RCA part of the investigation. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay.
I'm just curious if rain on the CAPA day is also good luck.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. So yeah, I like that one. That's very funny. So another thing to add on that rainy CAPA day is if I've got more than one root cause, I may well need more than one CAPA. So just putting that out there for you to think about.
So one problem statement, two potential root causes.
You could easily have that. So, so when you do your well-scoped investigation, you could identify more than one root cause that absolutely could happen. For most of the CAPAs that we're talking about, that likely won't occur, but I'm just saying it could be. So I'm going to give you something else. I'm going to give you a new acronym because we had CAPA, right? So now I'm going to give you a new acronym. So every good CAPA should be a SMART CAPA. Yep. Okay. So SMART. So it needs to be, and I'll go into each one of these, right? But it needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, result-focused, and time-bound. Okay. So let's just, go into each of these in a little more detail. So it needs to be specific. The actions that you're identifying in your CAPA plan to eliminate that root cause should be clearly written, clearly defined. What are you doing? How are you doing it? By when are you going to do that? So very specific. What I don't like to see in a CAPA let's say if, one of the actions was somebody thought, I'm going to run more effective meetings. Okay, that would not be a very specific action. So I really am going to look to see, very specific actions in my CAPA. I also want it to be measurable. Each task or action should be designed so that you can easily measure and know when it's been completed. I'm going to write an SOP, I'm going to conduct training, I'm going to, whatever those actions are, I should be that discreet as I'm laying them out in my CAPA plan. And they should be achievable, right? That's the A in SMART. That means that I don't want to put anything in there that's unrealistic. All my actions should be feasible, and they should be able to be accomplished in my current environment. They should be realistic. Here's an example of something that might not be achievable. I put an action in there. I'm going to do this and this and this. And one of my key vendors is going to release a new version of the software and blah, 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 and carry on. Well, I've just committed in my action plan an action for something or somebody that is outside of my sphere of control. And that's not really an example of a good CAPA, because now if that person goes beyond the due date for their action, my entire CAPA could be in jeopardy. So I want all of my actions to be achievable. I want them to be under my control. I should be really trying to design my CAPA plan so that they really are, something that I can direct myself. Okay. The next one in my acronym, the R, is result focused. So they should be, those actions that we're designing should be designed so they lead to a desired outcome. The goal should be obvious, and it sounds kind of obvious to us, but sometimes you get into bigger plans and you kind of lose focus. So they really do need to be specific and discrete and lead to the goal that I'm trying to get to. And they need to be time bound. That's the T in SMART. So I need something that is going to be, I need to know precisely by when I'm going to be doing something so that I know exactly when I can expect this CAPA plan to end. So that's my acronym, SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, result focused, and time bound.
What's some timeframes you typically see, in terms of, I know with the examples you're giving around the root cause, some of the root cause we were talking last episode, are they a month or a week? What's realistic that you see? I know it's specific per CAPA, but as a general rule.
It absolutely is. And, I don't like to get into trying to prejudge what the process owner, the expert in the system in question, thinks is best. They should be aggressive timeframes, but they need to be achievable, right? There's a risk that we're trying to mitigate here and eliminate ultimately. So, but we don't want to give it short shrift and put something in that's not going to be sustainable. So all of these plans are going to have to be reviewed by a quality professional, but they're going to be kicking the tires, as it were, to make sure that you're not carrying on that risk for some undue length of time. So people will be, the quality folks will be, driving for as aggressive a time frame as possible while still making sure that they're achievable.
Makes sense. I could see some perfectionists trying to make sure they leave enough time to, come up with the greatest solution ever versus being truly timely for the problem that needs to be fixed.
Right. So, and another little, I think, tip to make sure CAPAs are, executed when you want and when you need is I like to have a person. These can all be the same person or different people, but I like to have a person identified as owning each task. versus a team, say, so that I can turn to a person to say, how is this going? Is this at risk? Is this on time? Or have you completed this? Where's the evidence for this? So having a go-to person identified for each task is important. And I like to have one person, named person, as overall accountable for the CAPA versus a team, because then we don't get into that diffusion of responsibility where somebody says, yeah, I did my part, and somebody else, so having a person who's accountable for that, they may not be responsible for all the tasks, but they're accountable for the overall CAPA closure. I think that's another good attribute of a good CAPA. So just like some of the other areas, some of the things that I've come across that you try to avoid when you're doing a really nice CAPA. CAPA plans can be incomplete. They can be unrealistic, and therefore you can't achieve them or close them. And sometimes people don't follow the exact CAPA plan. These are all reasons why why CAPA plans don't get closed. And you really want to drive that very clear, discrete, time-bound, achievable activity.
Makes sense.
Can I give you an example of one?
Certainly.
Okay. So if you remember from our last episode, we were talking about the root cause for not having those informed consents was that somebody, I think it was the coordinator at the site, was using sticky notes in the source notes, and then they fell out and the investigator didn't know there was a new informed consent form. That was the root cause of the problem, why so many subjects didn't get consented. So if we're going to put a CAPA plan in place to address that, if we go back to our definitions of correction, corrective action, preventive action, which your corrections were correcting past problems but not preventing future ones. Corrective actions were preventing a recurrence of a past problem, and preventive actions of preventing a first-time occurrence of a potential problem. That was a mouthful. If in that language, the correction for that root cause that we identified in this CAPA plan that we're creating now would be, I could hold a meeting immediately for all the site staff and explain the risks of using non-standard documentation like sticky notes, and to stop the use of that at once. Don't do that. So that would be a correction, right?
Gotcha.
So I'm fixing that past problem right there. My corrective action would be to create a new SOP to detail proper documentation practice, and one that would be permissible at the clinical site. And I assign a due date of date X, and the person writing it is going to be Mike. Right? So that's corrective action number one. I'm going to write an SOP. And correction action number two is that I'm going to implement that SOP and train all the relevant staff by date Y. Okay. So there's another corrective action that I can see evidence for each of these now. I can look at an approved SOP, and I can look at a training log, and I can make sure that those are done. That's what I want. I'm looking for that kind of discrete, objective evidence when I know those steps are taken. And my preventive action could be, I'm going to introduce that new SOP to all my clinical sites. Even though I only had the problem at this one where somebody was using sticky notes, I'm going to introduce that everywhere else, even the places that never had that problem. That would be my preventive action. Do you like that?
I do. I was wondering where you're going with the preventative action, seeing you nipped in the bud at that site, but yeah, thinking more broadly at the other sites.
Totally. I've always got to
happen again.
Yeah. So that is my CAPA plan, right? That's all she wrote. But it's not good enough just to make sure that I've implemented all these actions. I need to make sure that they actually eliminated the root cause that I identified in my root cause analysis, because this is important stuff. In this example, we're talking about patients' rights, about their safety. I mean, nothing's more important than that, right? So I need an effectiveness check, or we call them ECs sometimes for short, because we love acronyms. And so I'm going to implement an effectiveness check at the end of that CAPA. So let me tell you a little about effectiveness checks here. And this will be our last piece, right, to the 5-step recipe. So the purpose of that effectiveness check, or EC, is to verify that the CAPA plan, the way I implemented it, really did eliminate the cause of the problem that I encountered, right? It's pretty straightforward because none of this is complex. So that's the purpose of it. And so therefore, ergo, it can really only happen after my CAPA plan is implemented. I can't start implementing my effectiveness check until I've completed my CAPA. Believe me, I've seen everything.
Hence the order is still important, right up to the end. Got to follow the steps in order.
Totally. That's very good, Grasshopper. So it answers the question, did I fix the right problem? Right? And it really does, if it doesn't eliminate, it totally minimizes the chance that I'm ever going to have this problem happening again. So a couple of little tips for me as far as effectiveness checks go. I think they should be defined at the same time that you propose your CAPA plan, not after. So you should, for 2 reasons, right? So you should, when you do your CAPA plan that we just finished, at the same time that I'm designing my CAPA plan, I should design what my effectiveness check test is going to be. I shouldn't wait until I've implemented my entire CAPA plan and then think about what effectiveness test would make sense, right? For 2 reasons. One is, not all the time, but a lot of the time, we've got these electronic systems that manage workflow. And as soon as the last CAPA action closes, if you've already got your effectiveness test check defined, it can open that up in the workflow. So it just flows right in, right? So that's one reason, practical wise. The other is, I don't want to game the system and wait until my CAPA is done and then start thinking about what EC would be best to make sure I pass, right? That's not really the spirit of CAPA. I should be defining that with the CAPA as I'm designing the CAPA so that I'm really testing for the right thing. So for those reasons, I really insist on, when a CAPA is coming in for approval, and I want to look at the entire narrative, I'm going to look at each piece, the problem statement, the investigation, root cause analysis, the CAPA plan, and the effectiveness check. And as a quality professional, I should see how they all fit together. And if I like them and I approve them, and if I have an electronic system that manages that, then that can all be input into the system and it can all flow right through in the workflow. Does that make sense?
Little bow on top, all wrapped up.
Absolutely. And I think that good effectiveness checks have these attributes. They've got clear criteria to measure. Again, no ambiguity. There should be a clear and objective threshold for success in my EC test to determine if it's effective. If I have no more than 2 defects in this process, I will deem this to be effective after this amount of time. It's super specific, right? And if the mechanism I'm using to measure if I've eliminated my root cause is to monitor the process for a while, to look for defects and to make sure they don't happen, that monitoring period that I'm using should align to the frequency that I expect to encounter the problem with, right? Like, this is common sense stuff, but again, I've seen everything. So some of the common pitfalls in effectiveness checks I've seen were measuring the wrong thing. Like, I eliminated root cause, but then the effectiveness check I put in is measuring something completely different. It's like, well, why are you doing that, buddy? So, so that's one problem I see. Also, failure to monitor for the appropriate amount of time. We were just talking about that a second ago. So I got a problem that occurs like typically every other month, but I'm only monitoring for 3 weeks. It's like, well, I never gave it a chance to break again. Okay. And then another thing I see all the time is closing the CAPA without even doing the EC.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Seems like a cardinal sin.
Well, for quality folks, I mean, you should take a risk-based approach. If I've got a minor observation that, you know, requires a CAPA, I might not necessarily do an EC on something like that, but certainly anything that, you know, is at all systemic in nature, anything touching a patient at all in nature, you know, I'd be putting an EC in place certainly for those. So now this is my example for my EC. Okay. So remember our example of the sticky notes?
I do.
And the sticky notes were in the source notes telling the investigator that there was a new form, a new version of the informed consent form, or ICF, right? And the investigator didn't see that, so didn't have them read consent, and that was the problem. So so during that investigation, they found that there was an average of about 5 subjects consenting every month at that site, let's say. And that was going to be expected to continue for about the next 6 months as they continued enrollment for this trial, let's say, right? So I got about 5 a month. It's going on for about 6 months. So the proposed effectiveness check could be that the CRA is going to monitor for any reconsenting implementation in the next 2 months for the new version. And if no subjects use the wrong version of the ICF form in that period of time, the 2 months, we'll deem the CAPA to be effective. So I've got an effectiveness check that has a clear pass-fail. I'm allowing 0 defects, which is, you know, as high a threshold as you can get, but this is important stuff because it's patient safety, so it should be. And I'm putting it in for an appropriate amount of time. I'm consenting, you know, 5 subjects a month. So monitoring for 2 months, that gives me 10 opportunities for this to fail. And if I have 0 failures in that period of time, I'm going to say, fine, this is good for closure. And then I can close my CAPA. And that's really all she wrote.
I like it.
So, so that is the last step of the 5-step process for CAPA. So there was problem statements, investigation, root cause analysis, the CAPA plan that we just went through today, and then the effectiveness check. And if we follow those 5 steps in order, we should get a pretty decent CAPA. So hopefully people found this helpful, and they can give their next CAPA a good kick in the tire.
Perfect. Well, thank you as always, Leo, for dropping some CAPA knowledge. And as we get ready for our next topic, if there's anyone in the audience here has a area of interest, you know, please put it in the comments. Where I was looking for new topics. Might have some guest speakers next time on the podcast. So stay tuned and tune in again for TriRadial's podcast, Steering the Ship. Mike Jensen signing off.
Thank you.